Presley, welcome to the Ed Tyll Show on Starcom Radio Network. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Ed. Glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you along. I was saying earlier how much we learn from some of the great works of fiction in the 20th century about what was to come, science fiction, Gene Roddenberry, people like that. You've got a handle on writing thrillers, but there's also great reverberation in the themes that we currently see in the news. How did that merger happen for you?
Well, you know, it's actually a little bit of a coincidence, although because I started writing this book 18 years ago, believe it or not, and put it down for a long time, and then picked it up and did revisions and finally published it in January of this year. But you could say that things that are happening in the news today have been happening in cycles for, many years. In the year 2000, you could point to events that are not that different from things that we're seeing now, maybe different by degrees, right? Things seem to be running amok in the world right now.
Indeed.
And the book seems very, timely because similar events happen in the book.
We'll talk about your satirical work in a moment, but I love that this topic comes from the headlines in the news, and also from a deep understanding that some people have, yourself included, of what religion really is. What do you feel the role of religion is today in modern times?
Well, it's the role religion has is a little uncomfortable because it was, in almost every case, religion was invented in an isolated situation by one culture with, very little knowledge of the world around, beyond their horizons, right? Religions are old. And, we've become a global society with progressive values versus conservative values, and different cultures and different religions finding out about each other. And when those religions were invented, they didn't really account for any of those kinds of tensions, right? But now we have those tensions, right? So the question is, what is the role of religion when you have all these tensions that, want you to rethink, ask people to, rethink about what religion really means, and is it even relevant in modern times when there's, lots of competing values within your neighborhood, within your country, right? So, what is the role of religion? It's a guidepost for sure, right? I was raised as a Catholic, and I was even a choir boy at one point. But, I just realized after a while that I wasn't 100% comfortable with everything that I had learned in school, because it didn't quite fit in with what was going on around me in the world, right? Religion is a little bit absolute, right? And the world is a relative place.
Sure.
Right? So.
And it was also, for many years, I same way. I was raised a Catholic in the early 1960s, where, before the big revolution of the 60s and the big upheaval, it was a place of refuge, and it kind of existed in a compartment. I grew up in the Bronx, so you had Saturday was the day for the Jews, and they would celebrate that day, and they would go to temple that day, and then the Catholics and the Christians on Sunday. So there wasn't a lot of this sharing. There wasn't a lot of overlap. Today, everything happens simultaneously, and modern terrorism, I think, does a great disservice to religion, because you can make religion do what you want it to do if you start cherry-picking out of your holy book, right?
Yeah, that's right. In the book, at one point, I think one of the characters actually says that God is not your pit bull, because I think religion gets used that way a lot. It's a stick that people use to beat up people that are not like them. It's sometimes the justification that people keep inside for the injustices that they suffer, right? You're going to get yours in the afterlife because you're a bad person, but I've led a good life, so I'm going to go to, heaven or paradise or whatever. So there's, an element of justice too, right? So religion is used like that, right? And I think that's because people look upon it as a set of rules to live by. That's like the absolute part I mentioned.
Right.
It's like these are the rules, and if you don't follow these rules, you're outside the box. You're outside the circle of trust. But it's really meant, maybe this answers your earlier question, to be a path to enlightenment. It's a spiritual thing. That's what the intention always was, right? You're supposed to get enlightened. And, instead it's basically, 12 steps to heaven or something like that.
Right. And we live in an era that is so secular that the emphasis everywhere you look is on self, and the era of the selfie and the narcissism, that today it doesn't seem to provide the safe place. It doesn't seem to be a place of delight, a place of, becoming your best self. It really becomes what you said before. I'm right, and here's why. Check this verse. Check this quote. Check this principle. And extracted, it's not part of the original context, and context doesn't seem to mean much today. When you wrote the book about the modern Messiah's appearance, what was your context for that? Did you see the future as something similar to today, or a throwback to the way religion was, say, 50 or 100 years ago in modern society?
Well, that's actually the big draw, I think, of the book, because, there is a Messiah that appears in the story. It's in the near future, like the year 2020. But what I do is I play it out the way in the real world I think it would play out, because even though everyone imagines that's a super good thing, the Messiah appears and miracles happen, and we all rise into the clouds. It probably would be welcomed by certain factions, but it might not be welcomed by everybody, because like you said, we're narcissists. We've got our things, we've got our agendas, our finances, our property, our politics. All those things would be threatened if a man appeared on the world stage capable of miracle acts and started to develop a global following. Some people would find that inconvenient, in the real world, governments, politics, terrorist organizations, it isn't what their Messiah is supposed to be like, things like that. And it would actually probably cause a lot of violence and unrest, and might actually be eventually looked upon as a threat. A Messiah that appears in the world that's, one religion's Messiah might be looked upon as a threat by other parts of the world.
Indeed.
And the book plays out that scenario.
Now, when you go from an apocalyptic thriller to satirical shorts and just the satire form in general, they seem at almost opposite ends of the spectrum. Satire, it always has a chuckle with it. It always has a questioning, kind of a skepticism to it. And good old-fashioned religion, the opposite of that. How did that work for you as a writer? What tempted you, if I can use that pun, to go in a satirical direction? How did that happen? Were you always a bit of a satirist?
Ed, that's an excellent question. And there is actually a common thread, because satire could be defined as taking a situation and taking it to the absurd extreme, and the purpose, making you laugh and whatever, is to send a message, right? To expose something that's ridiculous and maybe not so obvious. So you make it even more ridiculous, and it becomes a little clearer to the reader, and then, laughing at your jokes and your story, maybe they think about things, right? Satire is supposed to have a little bit of an agenda like that. And the thriller that I wrote, The Day and the Hour, is kind of the same thing in a way, right? I'm taking a situation that everyone imagines and putting it in an extreme scenario. So the Messiah appears, but a lot of people don't like it. And it does the same thing, right? It plays out a scenario that's very, apocalyptic. It's out there, amazing stuff happens in the book. And the idea is to make you think about what religion is and what it does. So even though one's funny and one's scary, one's a thriller and the other's a satire, it's still me doing it, and I kind of do the same thing at both ends of of those extremes.
Interesting. Now, when you wrote the thriller, you talked about the 18-year process that went into it. What did you learn about mankind or humans during the creating of your characters? Were you surprised by what they did? Were you surprised by where the story went? And what did make it drag out for 18 years, do you think?
Well, I mean, it took me about 2 years to really do the construction of the story, figuring out the plot, the characters, and then the research, right? It's a globe-spanning story, so I had to do a lot of research about places, Greece, Italy, and the religions, right? I had to read about the Bible, the Quran, the original Old Testament Jewish texts, apocryphal texts, Gnostic Gospels, all kinds of stuff.
Right.
And, you learn that there's common threads, even though these different factions find themselves at odds, right? They're always, in conflict. They actually all want, in some ways, the same thing, right? The man is hardwired to try to explain to himself what he can't understand, what he or she can't understand, right? So primitive tribes imagined that the trees and the rocks had spirits, right? Because we had to figure out, we had to explain stuff to ourselves, and then we had to put ourselves in it, right? We had to be part of the purpose if we decided there was a purpose. And that's just always been, you just keep spinning that, as we evolve. And, religions are kind of an outgrowth of that same thing, trying to, at least, from this author's perspective, trying to explain the inexplicable in a way that makes it relevant to people, right? So that's basically what I discovered. And, I wrote the book partially to try and answer those questions for myself. And I think, I did get somewhere with that process.
Right. That's exactly what I think, right? You see the work when it's finished, but during the process, it has to do something for you first, the author, before you would expect anybody to read it and be compelled by it. Do you think about the reader when you're writing, or do you just keep it between you and the story to make sure it gets to the threshold that you're reaching for?
Yeah, another good question. So I think about the characters in the story, and if they're real, if they become people when I'm writing the story, are they consistent? Do they go somewhere? Do they have an arc? Do they, develop? Do they, have any kind of growth in the story as people in the story? Because people that are going to read the book are going to relate to the people that are the characters in the book. So that was the first thing, right? They have to be real to me and real to the reader. Right, and then for the readers, it's supposed to be a thinking man's, thriller, a page turner that has some ideas that are worth thinking about. So that was the goal, right? So for me, thinking about the reader came after I wrote the book and gave it to my editors, right? The editors then compel the author to start thinking about the reader, like, this is too many words, purple prose,
right.
This is inconsistent. And I think at the very last stage and it's healthy, right? That's the way it's supposed to be. You're supposed to, be willing to take criticism and polish your stuff so that it's readable by the public and still consistent with what you wanted to do in the first place. And that's when that happened, right? The editors, I had two rounds of that, really made me think about, how's this going to read to someone who's not me.
And how are you with that?
Pretty good.
How are you with that kind of criticism and feedback? If you get some feedback from an editor that you weren't expecting, is it easy for you to latch on to what they're saying, or do you really have to take some time to digest that because you are shifting point of view?
It isn't easy, to take, an author loves his own words, and originally this book was 800 pages
wow.
when I finished the first draft,
wow.
And it's like half that now. I mean, it's much better because, you want to get every idea out there, and, there's all kinds of tangents and backstories that were originally in there, and the editors just let you don't really need that. This needs to be very economical, and you want it to be a page turner, you better make it succinct so people want to turn pages. And it was a lesson for me, very especially the first round, very hard, but
Sure.
the second round, a little more scar tissue around my
I'm so
brain,
glad.
so I could deal with it.
Right. I'm so glad you used that phrase, because it is surgical, right? You have to be so careful that what you're cutting away doesn't do anything to harm the body at large, but does just what it takes to make it accessible, right? It's a very fine line.
I've learned a lot. Work that I have created since that project is a lot cleaner, because I think about what the editor is going to say a lot more while I'm writing it, more than the first time.
Presley Acuna is our guest. The book, The Day and Hour. Let me give you the website for that. percussionpublishing.com/The Day and the Hour, the book. When you confront Trump and decide to work with that theme, what were you thinking before you started to write and use him? How did he strike you, and when did you start paying attention to him?
Well, I'm a New Yorker, just like you, Ed. I went to school in the Bronx, and I know of Donald Trump, all the way back to the 1980s firsthand, right? I've seen him in the news in New York City. So I have always thought that he's not presidential material. So when he suddenly came on the scene and started defeating all of his opponents in the Republican primaries, I really felt like it's a phenomenon. It's a phenomenon of two things, right? The news is entertainment, right? So they just report anything and enabled it, right? They enabled it because they just need to entertain you, and the internet, right? Because it's unfiltered news. We didn't used to have that. We used to have filtered news in the form of newspapers, magazines, curated news, right?
Sure.
That's gone. It's all unfiltered now. So that enables all this, right? So immediately, as soon as something ridiculous is uttered in an interview or in a newscast, we all just absorb it, and it's normal now, right? It's like daily shootings, right? That's like normal now.
Right.
So I just felt like this really needs to get exposed. We really need to just, shout this out and say that this, even though everybody's getting used to everything he says every day, it's really not good. It's not normal. So we need to expose it as absurd. So we wrote a satire.
Right. Now, were you shocked when you started to see the crowds he was getting and the momentum that seemed to come from his challenge to the system, that he really was an outsider, albeit through the Republican primaries, but this guy didn't sound like much of a Republican on given days, and the standard Republican crowd was really pushed back by him a great deal in the beginning. I guess they didn't even know how to handle him because he was so unpredictable. But what was your take on that? Did you say, wow, here we go, it's the Republicans at it again with another version? Or were you like, here goes the end of the Republican Party as we know it?
Well, I mean, it's a matter of reaping what you sow, in my opinion, Ed. The Republican Party has promised working class Americans prosperity through ideas like trickle down for decades now, and they never got it, right? And it's not entirely the Republicans' fault. That's a whole nother hour-long argument. There's NAFTA and other things that, bipartisan root causes.
Right.
But the bottom line is, a lot of people are left out in the cold, especially after the Great Recession. And it just blew back. It's blowback. Eventually people have had enough. And he comes along and starts speaking, in plain English, saying things the way he really feels, or at least the way he really wants people to think he feels. And it's truth talk to a lot of people, and it's not the typical diatribes that come from politicians. So it's fresh, right? So I mean, I even understand that, right? He's really being straight up in the viewpoints of the people that are listening to him. And on the left we had Bernie Sanders, kind of the same idea, right? He was being very plain spoken, challenging the status quo. That's what really, I think, draws people to him, that he just challenges the status quo and isn't afraid to do so.
Now, when they were both starting out, I think a lot of people said, it's interesting, but no one like either of them is going to go very far. Were you surprised at the intensity of their following? Obviously, Bernie, not a part of it now, and I think it's kind of funny the other day that he bought this expensive house to go write his memoirs, and this was a guy that was a socialist. He's got 3 houses now. Okay, we'll put him aside because he's really in the dugout. But, Trump is up there every inning saying things that I think for many it would make satire almost impossible, because he's already a satire in so many of these statements of what was. How is it for a writer like yourself to add on to or, spin his already outrageous statements into satire? Does it make it any more difficult that he's so wild with the use of his language?
It is a little bit of a challenge, right? How to out-absurd what is already absurd.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. So, there's angles that you can take. So the satire book that you're referring to is titled Trumpicana, and it's got it takes one angle is what happens on Inauguration Day. So there's a lot of material there that you could play off on, and it has a twist ending. So that was our take, right? Here's Inauguration Day. He's Trump, and he acts like Trump,
right?
And we give you a twist ending that will make you laugh. And then the other story is 16 years in the future. So if we had a Trump presidency come and gone, and, the election process has really melted down and he's deconstructed a bunch of things like he promised. What if it came to the point that the presidential election process had devolved to the point of being not that different from a reality show on television? And that's what the next story is, the presidential smackdown of 2032. It's a reality show competition for who gets to be president. So, we just sort of take different angles that are a little beyond or a little outside of what you know now about Trump, but use the Trump personality, the Trump phenomenon to, tell you a story that will make you laugh and make you think.
Our guest is Presley Acuna, the Ed Tyll Show, Starcom Radio Network, AM/FM stations all across the country. Welcome to this discussion. The system itself, you and I have been around for a while. We've seen politicians come and go. We see trends come and go. Do you ever get the feeling that what's happening now in this really unorthodox current election cycle would be capable of breaking this system? Or is this system built that no matter what kind of wackadoo comes along, the system, the constitutional guidelines of how we run American society are strong enough to handle any individual? Or is the right individual a real threat to the function of the system itself? Well,
now that we've had the phenomenon of Trump, whether he wins or loses, that is now, as I said before, the ridiculous becomes normal. We just absorb it, subsume it, and now the gauge is reset, right? And that's going to happen. There's going to now be that the thinking that this kind of insurgency is possible, and there'll be another one. If the status quo doesn't change, the tensions remain the same. If there's still people left out in the cold in the working class, they're going to, on the left and the right, they're going to probably try again next election cycle. The only way to really change it is, it's really hardwired into our system. We have, zoning laws, I think they're called, right? Redistricting, that's what it is. Redistricting, prevents a fair, balance of different voters in any senator or congressman's home, right? So they skew the results by doing redistricting, and you got to basically unwind that if you want to have any kind of a chance of having a fair and balanced election. And then there's things like superdelegates, right, which also skew things in favor of the establishment. So, to unwind things like that, you almost need a constitutional convention, and who's going to approve that? So,
wow. Right.
There's not much choice except to have insurgents.
All right. And in our lifetime, even the couple of times they've attempted constitutional amendments, it seems virtually impossible, certainly in the current environment, that you would have that kind of consensus to really make a structural change. It's an excellent way to look at it. You know, gerrymandering, when you and I were kids and we were studying civics in school, was always brought up as something bad. And for being known as bad for so long, it's still in full bloom. Every state does it. And I mean, I lived in Florida for a while where they did this in a hardcore way and making districts never change. Are you optimistic? Can you be optimistic? Can a satirist and a fiction writer be optimistic about what you see, or is it inevitable doom and we just want to navigate it in the most possible way, but we see the thing going down?
I hate to think that anything is inevitable. The democracy we have, despite all of the mistakes and pressures and corruption and money that influences, who gets positions of power, it nonetheless has not yet managed to undermine democracy. That we can actually use our vote and influence outcomes. It just takes a lot of motivation, a lot of unhappiness, basically. So I mean, it could happen, but the other thing that could happen is that we could have incremental improvement, right? Maybe the next administration will be able to get infrastructure projects going, and the economy will rebound, and maybe people will be better off 4 years from now than they are now. And if that's the case, maybe that's the other way to get positive change, right? An incremental approach. One way or the other, though, the democracy we have will continue to evolve because it was built well from the beginning, even though it's got all these problems. I really believe that.
Absolutely. Wow. That is good to remember. Hey, I'm looking at, first of all, congratulations on both books. The Day and the Hour, you can get at percussionpublishing.com, The Day and the Hour, the book. But what a great cover on Trumpicana. That's a brilliant cover. Do you have input on that, or is that somebody at the publishing company that listens to what you're writing about and then conceives that?
Actually, we conceived that. Me and my collaborating author, Kendall Smith, on that particular book, spent a fair amount of time trying to invent a good title and cover concept. We had things like trumped up shorts and what was another one? I can't remember, but Trumpicana eventually came to our minds, and we thought it was perfect. And of course, that leads to thinking about oranges. His complexion is orange, and it just made sense, right? So we sought out caricaturists on the internet. Internet can be a wonderful thing, and eventually commissioned Jason Seiler, who is an acclaimed caricaturist. He's done, Rolling Stone, the Pope Man of the Year caricature on Time. He's got a lot of credits to his name, and it's a big coup for us to have gained his interest. He was very, very pleased with our idea, very turned on by the concept. Gave us a great deal, and is actively promoting the book too, because he just loves the work as much as we do, and I think it's perfect for the cover.
Well, awesome. Congratulations to you. I look forward to reading the book. The Day and Hour sounds like the kind of book that is still perfect to be alone for most of the day. Take it to the park, find your a spot under a tree, and just get lost in. I thank you for that. We need more of it. The great writers that get us to read, I think, really need to be congratulated today, because we just don't do anything in long form. It's so hard to keep an attention span that we need more of it, and I thank you for doing it. And hang in there, my friend. Keep doing it, and we love to have you back on the show. When you working on anything right now that you can talk about?
Well, I've got a short story collection, which is going to be called Driving to Distraction, which will probably come out early next year. We're in the process of editing all the stories. It'll be about 12 stories. It should be fun. Some satires, some scary stuff. It's a collection of short works that I've been working on over the last few years.
Let me ask you, if something scares you, Is that a good starting point, or is it hard to be frightened by something you're going to go in depth on and it kind of gets demystified and the fear melts away when you're confronting it in the writing?
Yes, when something scares me, that's an inspiration to write a story about it for sure. And anything I write about, it's usually coming from, wanting to face something, right? A question, a mystery. Can I even write in this genre? Things like that. It's all about challenges and mysteries for me.
Presley, a pleasure. Thanks for making time for us today. Congratulations on the books, and I welcome you back on the show. We'll talk more, okay?
It's been a pleasure, Ed. Thank you.
You got it. Presley Acuna, The Day and the Hour. Go to percussionpublishing.com, The Day and the Hour, the book, on Starcom Radio Network.